Greetings, America. Today is the 4th of February. It is quite cool and crisp here in southeastern coastal Carolina. And today, I'm basically going to talk about responses to some of my content, a handful of my videos, and or more importantly, if I share or post a meme or forgive me if I'm not that technically savvy on the old social media platform, but when I get responses to certain things, whether they're political, socio-political, whatever the case may be, I feel like they make great talking points because now that I've become cognizant of the fact that good people, ordinary good people, can differ in opinions due to their experiences in life, the way that they view the world, and it's wrong to dehumanize them, it's wrong to demonize them. It's forced me to take that into consideration and attempt to experience other people's point of views to include rather than just like share something on the internet like, oh, this is 100% fact, and try to continue to increase the size of the wedge that separates us. I open it up for discussion, and whether it's my videos or stuff that I've posted, I've gotten some responses. So I'm going to read those responses and then respond back to them. But again, I'm not going to dime anybody out. So without further ado, okay. So I had posted something on Facebook that I had shared from I think one of my cousins. It was a photo and whatnot, and it said, "Remember when Democrat protesters stormed the U.S. Capitol in 2018, took over the U.S. Senate building, and tried to get into the U.S. Supreme Court during the Kavanaugh confirmation hearing? Democrat legislators and the mainstream media cheered it on. If it wasn't for double standards, liberals would have none at all." If that's 100% true, if that actually happened, then yes, my limited knowledge of it is because of the lack of reporting on it, the lack of sensationalizing of it. In which case, one of my buddies responded, how about completely unrelated? 2018 protesters banged on the doors of the Supreme Court. Hundreds were arrested. None of them stormed anything. You've got some straight up disinformation right here. In which case, he then provided what was supposed to be the clarity, which was that same photo, but it talks about how college students from the University of Wisconsin at Madison and the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee essentially took to the Wisconsin Supreme Court to protest over some sort of collective bargaining bill. So if all of those things are 100% true, then he's not wrong. It was the misuse of a photo that happened at a completely separate event to shape, in this case, a more conservative-minded narrative. But it does beg the question, did anything particularly happen that could have been considered unruly, riotous, whatnot, during the Kavanaugh hearings that just more importantly went rather unreported, or if they were reported, the reporting wasn't sensationalized like the events on the 6th, where you don't have conservative elected officials, who are self-proclaimed media whores, taking to the interwebs talking about how they were in fear of their life because other elected officials were trying to have them murdered, which as far as I know is technically illegal and against the law if it can be proven so. So I often wonder if the accusation of such, if it has no merit and no basis, can be considered slanderous or liable. You'll have to let me know what you think. Or if any of you are subject matter experts on the law, let me know what you think. In response to my last video talking about elected officials and, some of my thoughts and opinions on that, the hypocrisy, etc., and whether we should call them representatives versus leaders and all, well, the videos out there. Again, my one friend responded, they need term limits so they don't become apathetic toward their constituents. Ultimately, their purpose is to represent the interests of those they represent. I don't mind if they become leaders, but I agree that leaders aren't elected. You can absolutely walk into the Capitol and meet with your representatives if they're available. For that matter, you can go into the chambers of the House and Senate whenever there are open proceedings. If you cause a ruckus, you'll be removed because for interfering with the ability of elected officials to do their constitutional duty. That's where the line is really drawn for what happened on the 6th. You can protest, you can even go inside of federal property, but you can't destroy things or attempt to prevent Congress from doing their job. If you ever want to really dig into the Second Amendment, I'm a borderline scholar, largely because I consider it to be important for gun owners to know their rights and how not to run afoul of the law. So essentially, without reliving the video, I discussed how the Capitol building is the people's building, and essentially anybody should be able to walk in there and, obviously peacefully with decorum and whatnot, or even passionately have a discussion with their elected official, because as I've stated before, here I'm in District 3 of North Carolina, which means I wish I could remember their name, but I should have the freedom and the privilege to go talk to the representative from District 3 about any of my concerns and or question him or her on how they're doing their job. Conversely, my 2 elected senators, I should be able to go and meet with them and, discuss with them some of my concerns and my issues as a, within the last few years, newly minted North Carolinian. And then as far as my comments on the Second Amendment, I said that I think one of the after effects, one of the positive consequences is that in addition to be able to defend yourself, you also have the unintended consequence of defending yourself against the government should it become too tyrannical. Um, so, other than that, doesn't really seem like we're disagreeing on much here. And then I think I just recently shared this one with the intent of soliciting a response, and I couldn't honestly remember if it was just a similar post but just a different take on it. So the post itself with a photo said, "Remember when BLM and Antifa sieged the White House last year, injured 60 Secret Service officers, and set the historic St. John's Church on fire? Then Trump had them cleared out with tear gas, and Democrat politicians / pundits defended the violent terrorists as peaceful protesters." So forgive me if I can't remember that incident verbatim, because once again, I defend myself by saying if the only way to know about something is if it in fact is reported, then that means we have to rely on media sources to report it, in which case, how they report it, body language, voice inflection, all of those things that anybody who's ever been an instructor is taught, how to control your mannerisms, your facial expressions, and your voice in order to convey your points. If it wasn't sensationalized, if it wasn't made out to be a big deal, then yeah, it's quite honestly, that's probably how I don't know about it. Although I do tend to sometimes tune out a lot of this stuff just because it just seems to be the same stuff day in and day out. I've openly stated I'm not a fan of BLM or Antifa. Antifa I find to be oxymoronic. They're an organization that claims to be against fascism, yet they themselves are probably the closest equivalent of the Nazi Germany brown shirts or the Democratic Party's Ku Klux Klan, which you can't deny. You can't be a fact denier. The Ku Klux Klan was a military, militia-style wing of the Democratic Party to help enforce Jim Crow segregation as well as Southern values of that time frame. BLM, again, I think by putting excess precedence on a particular skin color is a form of racism, and because ultimately in order to be pro there has to be a con. If you're going to promote skin color of one particular color, then you have to remove value from somewhere else. We don't have to agree on that. In fact, I would love the challenge, but so I had some responses to that. In which case, another friend from high school, who, again, I don't have permission to dime out, do you remember in 2018 when Democrat protesters stormed the Senate floor and then tried to overtake the Supreme Court during the Kavanaugh hearings? To which case I responded, didn't I post that earlier this week or last week? In which case my friend responded back, you may have actually. Shouldn't all of these events been treated equally and punishment been awarded to everyone at every event that took place? Was facial recognition not a thing then, or was it conveniently being ignored? Why is it acceptable for one group to act this way and not for another? Why is BLM up for a Nobel Peace Prize when here is a prime example of their protests being anti-peaceful. Then think about Seattle, Minneapolis, Chicago, and a host of other cities that were destroyed in protest. If unity is what we need, then why is there a double standard? These are the questions that go through my head, and you don't need to address them. Well, I'm addressing them, so you can beat me up later. Um, no, that's a fair point. Again, I don't believe in the premises of BLM. Um, and again, maybe it just comes down to name. Black Lives Matter, as in skin preference is our goal. Where that might not have been the core message by the original founders, which was, again, I believe their core message was they believe in this systemic process that white supremacists specifically go into law enforcement so that they can mistreat the black community. Um, that kind of seems to be the core value there. Uh, as to whether or not there's any validity to their peaceful protests being hijacked by outside agitators to provoke and incite the mob and, cause riots and looting and damage, I believe it's plausible. I believe there's the plausibility, if that's a word, where Black Lives Matter protests could have been hijacked. In which case, if some of the protesters then succumb to the mob mentality, uh, do we conflate or directly attribute those actions to the overall whole of Black Lives Matter? And for that, I don't really have an answer because I'm doing my absolute level best to resist any kind of confirmation bias. I'm not a fan of Black Lives Matter for my own personal reasons, but I don't want to arbitrarily associate blame where blame is undeserved. I think I can do both things. I can disagree with an organization and their premises and their core belief system, but at the same time, not blame them for something that maybe they didn't do, even if a few members on the outer fringe of their group did succumb to a mob mentality. Now, if I'm wrong and, Black Lives Matter protesters had no problem going from peaceful to riotous and ruckus and looting and destroying and all of those things, then it is what it is. At which point, where's that fine line? Where do we separate between whether or not we're going to associate everything with Black Lives Matter and just make them culpable for everything, or whether we're going to attempt to separate everything out and be like, look, the core members of Black Lives Matter, the core protesters who maintained their peaceful demonstration and maintained their peaceful assembly, uh, those should be the ones up for a Nobel Prize. I don't know the answer to that. Um, because as you can see, this can become rather dynamic and kind of bounce back and forth. Um, I don't know. As far as the whole facial recognition thing and all of that, um, I think as much as the KKK in its height, when I mean elected officials, Democrat, senators and congressmen, and then local level senators and congressmen at the state level, when they were part of the KKK and they fully enacted violence against the black community as well as possibly others like whites who were considered black sympathizers or other ethnic minority groups outside of the white spectrum, as much as they should have been classified as a domestic terrorist organization, I do believe Antifa, at the very least, should be labeled as a domestic terrorist organization. BLM could be somewhere in the middle, like with like a PETA or an animal rights group, where there are some fringe members. I just don't know enough. Because I do believe that there are some members of BLM who believe in the message and believe in the premises, but I don't know. I've seen the memes and or the videos where Black Lives Matter leadership in different locations is like full on socialist, Marxist, communist, whatever the case may be. So I'm trying to be very careful because you may have followers, you may have people, regardless of skin color, who believe that perhaps blacks are treated statistically more unfair than anybody else, but they themselves are not committing violence, they themselves are not rioting, looting, etc. So I apologize if I don't seem to provide a definitive answer. It's just, in the world I came from, a 70% solution now is better than a 100% solution later. And to be quite honest, based on the information available, while it all comes around to the same point, I disagree with them and I don't like them as an organization. I don't know how willing and able I am to group Black Lives Matter together with Antifa. And I think you also have to consider the private citizen. I think individual citizens who may not subscribe to a group, may be individual actors that either succumb to mob mentality, groupthink, or they're just individual actors. And then lastly, I'll put the tinfoil hat back on. If in fact there are entities, like groups of people in the one percenters, that are openly funding this, because I've seen this stuff on the internet that talks about how all these people get bussed in on these beautiful, wonderful charter buses that are like, like arena arena band style luxury liners, hauling them across the country. Um, Whether, these one percenters that are funding that kind of stuff, what is their end game? What is their end goal? And one of the theories I've postulated is that they want to ferment this division to a culminating point, in which case I don't see the minorities winning. I don't see the people that love to throw themselves under the umbrella of a minority, the anti-conservatives. I don't see them as winning. But I don't know. That was my brief little stint with the tinfoil hat. Um, Let me know what you all think. Even if it is just responding on the old Facebook, that's perfectly fine because that means we're having a conversation. Otherwise, when it comes to the old YouTubes, you know the deal. Hit like if you like it, hit dislike if you don't like it. Hit subscribe if you want to subscribe and know when you're going to get some more of this, as well as hit the notification bell. Other than that, that's all I got.